Okay. Morning, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Executive Committee of the Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes Fire Authority. To go now. So first item is apologies.
Councillor Nicknam Hussain.
Yeah, I think just an explanation of Councillor Hussein's absence. Councillor Hussain is currently in Senegal. He is taking part in what used to be the Dakar Rally, the Banjul Charity Rally as it's called now, which is organised by Rotary International. The annual event involves driving through France, Spain to pick up the ferry at Tarifa to Tangier, and then driving through Morocco, Western Sahara, Mauritania, Senegal, and finally into the Gambia. It's about 4,500 miles, and it's getting slightly expected back until Saturday. So clearly, he sent his apologies, particularly given his position as lead member on finance. There's about 90 vehicles taking part in this, all of which have been purchased by those taking part or donated by others. The vehicles and the contents, which are supplies for charities and local organisations in the Gambia, will be left there to be sold by Rotary International to raise funds for those charities. All of those taking part pay their own expenses in getting there and in flying home. And I hope that, notwithstanding the fact that we'd obviously prefer he was here, that you appreciate what he's doing for these charities. So hopefully that explains his absence. I'll handle the introductions to these items in his absence. So to the minutes of the previous meeting. I take it that these are a true record, and I can sign them as such. Thank you very much. Matters arising from those minutes. Okay. Yeah. So at EX9 recommendations from committees, overview and audit committee, 5th of November. The corporate risk management policy and framework. A member asked about the aggregate risk and how would members see that snapshot in relation to the range of risks that have been put forward over the last or 6 months in a way that does not put the burden on officers. What would be the logistics and the mechanics to enable members to have that viewpoint? The head of service improvement advised that she would consider how officers display the total number of risks being considered by the organisation outside the corporate risk register that was being shared with members. The head of service improvement advised that this will be included in the next risk management update for members. So EX20 performance management Q2 25-26. A member felt that it was a good idea to hold a workshop before the executive committee budget meeting in February to look at the whole time establishment and optimal number of firefighters. The deputy chief fire officer advised that work has commenced on the development of an analytical model to support a clearer understanding of resourcing requirements, including the whole time establishment and the optimal number of firefighters. This work will not be sufficiently progressed in time for the forthcoming budget meeting, but officers will advise members once it is complete. Moving on to EX21 budget monitoring report, April 25 to September 25. A member asked about the construction of Westcott Training Centre and felt it would be good to have a progress summary at each meeting. The Director of Finance and Assets advised he was happy to bring regular updates on it. There was not a lot to say at present, as there had been a lot of work in the background. He would confirm planning had been validated. He did confirm that planning had been validated. The planning department were now going to the site to view it themselves. The target date was 2nd of February, and Are we covering this later, Mark?
I can provide an update now if that's useful.
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
So the planning target date has now been moved back to the end of March. The planners wanted some more information on some ecology reports, and also discovered that there was a badger set on site which impinges on our boundary, so we need to make arrangements to make sure that's suitably dealt with. So that's now slipped back slightly. I'll keep members appraised as that progresses.
Yeah, I can just add to that I've spoken to the corporate director and the cabinet member, and I was conscious of the pressures that planning are under across the whole county. Asked them to expedite this, but then everyone else wants their application expedited. So,
Can I ask a question? Could you just, so obviously I'm familiar with the objections that are being raised by the parish council. Could you just set out how we're intending to deal and mitigate with the concerns they've raised? Because obviously they're a key stakeholder that we would want to be supportive of the training centre.
Yeah, absolutely. So they raised some objections to me after I went to their parish council meeting to engage with them. We responded in full in writing to those. One of their primary concerns is around the air quality and smoke. As members will know, there was a fire at Bucks Recycling, which has caused a lot of anxiety amongst them when we talk about doing live fires. So we've had an independent report on air quality, which says the impact is going to be very low. They are disagreeing with that report. We've kind of left it at that for now, and we'll see what the planners kind of say we need to do in respect to that.
okay, any other points to raise?
Sure.
Matters arising, sorry,
Yeah,
Councillor Stubbs.
should we have an update on the badger when,
Sure,
when we find out,
that's appropriate.
because there are some people who live close, and maybe they'll, the neighbours, maybe they'll be willing to
Dr.
take,
Badger, we
yeah, take the badger. One of the easiest things to me.
indeed, some experience, so. Moving on, then to item 4, disclosure of interests. Is there any disclosure required beyond what is on your regular disclosures? No, thank you. So moving on, we have an item on the agenda, scheme of allowances. I just need to point out that neither discussing or approving the scheme of allowances, nor discussing or approving the precept gives rise to a disclosable pecuniary interest. Questions? Understanding order?
None.
So moving on to the MTPF 2627 to 3031, which you'll find on pages 17 to 30.
Sorry.
I just need to have a slide tap, I'll get shown.
Yes, turn it on.
I should have pointed out earlier in the meeting, actually, before I go on. We note that Graham is not online with us today. Graham unfortunately was off sick, but despite the discomfort he's in, he is with us in spirit on screen. So MTPF, obviously Mark will, and Asif will run us through this, but the paper sets out the proposed revenue budget and capital programme through to 3031. In September 25, the committee was advised that a review was being undertaken as to how funding was allocated across local government, better known as the Fair Funding Review or Not So Fair Funding Review. At the time, specific allocations were unknown, and the committee was presented with the outputs of 2 independent models, if you remember, that gave an indication of the range of possible outcomes. Allocations to individual services weren't published until the provisional settlement on the 17th of December. Although the allocations were at the least worst end of the model scenarios, they still show a significant decrease in the non-council tax funding allocated to the service over the next 3 years, a reduction from 12 million in 25-26 to just 9.7 million in 28-29. The decrease is driven by an adjustment to the service's funding need based on a notional level of council tax. Same applies as far as Buckinghamshire Council is concerned, of course. To fully offset the decrease in non-council tax funding would actually require an increase in council tax of £9.46. However, the referendum limit for fire and rescue services is £5. For us, though, a £5 increase doesn't mean that we will be able to grow the service like we have in previous years. Simply means being able to afford the same number of staff that we have budgeted for currently. Alongside revenue budgets, we have been carefully planning and saving over a number of years, and those investments are about improving the day-to-day experience, safety and effectiveness of the workforce, and supporting our commitment to be an excellent, modern and agile fire and rescue service. Planned investment includes a brand new training centre at Westcott, which we just discussed, up to £8 million for the refurbishment or rebuilding of High Wycombe Station. Final proposals are expected for approval in March 26. And ongoing annual investment in operational equipment, ICT equipment, etc. So if Ashley would like to move us through the report in more detail and give questions, that would be good.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to focus on some of the key assumptions that underpin our revenue and capital budgets. Before handing over to Mark, who will update members on the position regarding reserves. The MTFP report, together with the revised Appendix A, sets out the proposed revenue and capital plans for the year 2026, 27, 2030, 31. As members will be aware, the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government has confirmed a multi-year settlement covering 2026 to 2029, which has been factored into our budgets. I would like to draw your attention to a number of key points. In terms of going through our budgets this year, we went through the zero-based analysis approach again, predominantly looking at supplies and services, reviewing every budget line from ground up. This work has enabled us to clearly identify where resources are required and realign budgets accordingly. For example, due to consistently high treasury returns throughout 25-26, next year's interest budget is now 200k higher than previously forecast. In terms of council tax precept flexibility, fire services have again been given the flexibility to increase council tax by up to £5 for a Band D property. The core spending powers published by MHCOG assume that all services will increase council tax by this amount. This is reflected in recommendation 1. If approved, the Band D precept will increase to £89.46 for 26-27, which roughly equates to an additional 10 pence per week per household. In terms of the fair funding assessment, the former settlement funding assessment has been rebranded as the fair funding assessment now. This now consolidates most grants, including revenue support grant and business rates income. The only grants excluded from the FFA are the fire-specific pension grant and the New Dimension grant. All other grants, including last year's National Insurance grant, have now been absorbed into the FFA. This consolidation into a single reduced funding envelope has had a notable impact on our overall funding position. Another bit I just want to bring to your attention in the report is a note around the Thames Valley Fire Control. Obviously, as part of the Thames Valley Fire Control, we contribute towards the revenue and the capital side. So our revenue contribution to Thames Valley Fire Control, our shared control room with other services, has increased by 38k this year, taking our 26-27 contribution to 1,052,000. In addition to this, the annual contribution to the Thames Valley Fire Control Renewals Fund has also increased from 50k to 90k per annum to support the replacement of the command and control system as approved by the Joint Committee in December. In terms of key planning assumptions in our MTFP, we've assumed a £5 precept increase each year throughout the MTFP. So that's from 2026 to 2031. In terms of council tax growth, we've assumed 1.6% from next year onwards. However, it must be noted that this year we only had growth in the region of around 1.28%. We've also assumed a pay award of 4% in 2026-27, followed by 3% per year thereafter. Turning to the capital program now, we've set a 5-year plan incorporating several major investments, including a new training facility at Westcott, up to 8 million for refurbishment or rebuild at Highwick and Fire Station, ongoing investment in operational fleet equipment and ICT refresh. This results in a total capital budget of 8.4 million for 26-27. Finally, I would also like to note that the capital program is supported by the reversal of the voluntary revenue provision, which is set out in the prudential indicators paper. I will now hand over to Mark, who will update members on the adequacy of reserves before we take any questions.
Thank you, David. So as members will see on page 23 of your packs, as a Chief Finance Officer, I'm required to report on, amongst other things, the adequacy of proposed financial reserves. As has already been stated, the Fair Funding Review has had a significant impact on our financial position. Given this position, my professional advice must therefore be for the authority to increase council tax by the maximum amount allowable without triggering a referendum, namely an increase of £5 on a Band B property. Although the reserves position on page 25 of your packs shows a significant decrease in reserves over the medium term, I'd like to reassure members this is not because we're using reserves to balance our revenue budget, but because of the ambitious capital investment plans we've set out to ensure our staff have the best facilities and equipment available to them. As if I'd be happy to take any questions.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. One would then envisage, if the capital programme goes forward, that we may start to get some external revenues coming back in a period of time, especially with the Westcott project. So it will be hopefully when we move to 27-28, hopefully we'll know something, projections of what they might be. As the principle of that project, I understand, was that it would be able to attract other users. So hopefully that will change that, but otherwise the projections that are quite difficult, don't they? Mildly.
Oh, yeah, so in terms of Westcott, when I presented it to members, I did say we're taking a prudent approach of assuming no external income coming in. But obviously that's the aspiration, is once we've got it up and running for ourselves, once we've bedded into it, is to then start to offer it out to other services. So yeah, there's an upside risk in terms of external income. Hopefully we'll be able to generate more of that in the future. And obviously we'll update members and the budget if we go through.
Thank you, Mark. Any further questions? No? Yes, Councillor Rose.
Thank you, Chairman. So first point I just want to make before I ask for some clarification and explore some points is that I think it is important to note, and I know this was covered in your intro, but we need to be crystal clear. We do not have precept flexibility. The government is forcing us to raise the precept because if we don't, the funding materially is removed from the service. And I think it is really important that people understand that, because unlike, for example, parish and town councils who are not capped, you know, and we have a situation where there are a number of parish and town councils where residents pay more for them than they do for the fire service. We as an executive committee are being forced with a choice, which is either take significant cut in funding or raise precepts. I find the word of the use flexibility to be pushing its meaning this year. And I just want to put on record that I just think that's a terrible approach from the government to fire services. There's a number of things in the report I just wanted to clarify. So the first point, and I'm sure there's a good reason for this, but I am really struggling to reconcile the budget as described in the Appendix 1, the approved budget for 25-26, with the budget that we actually approved. And I'm sure there's some reasons for it, but I went back through the papers, and the approved budget for 2025-26 was actually 42,715,000, not the 42,989 that's in the appendix. And there are some individual lines as well that don't reconcile. There are some that do, but there are some that don't. So it's just good to understand why is that. and what's the movement that's occurred? Because that if there's been a movement in the budget, that isn't the approved budget. It's been changes to the process through the year. The second thing is that there are some material areas in the budget that are moving. So the one I'd just be good to understand is we put a significant amount of additional resource in 25-26 into the People Directorate, and yet there's a further 716 K going into the People Directorate this year, taking the budget to 3.736 million. I did that right in my head. Similarly, we took a significant amount of money out of the delivery and corporate development planning budget last year to the tune of 845K, but that seems to be going back in large order next year. And indeed, if you look at the outlook for that directorate versus the previous budget outlook last year, again, there's some significant movement. So it's good to understand that. And I think I would certainly find it helpful for the paper before it goes to the fire authority to just set out in a bit more detail some of the movement in those individual lines. And I think the other sort of key element, and I recognise it's kind of there's a timing issue in the papers. Sorry, so there's an agenda ordering in the papers. But when we get to the budget monitoring report, we are reporting yet again quite a material underspend. And I know that underspend, when you work it down to the bottom, because there's a non-movement of reserves happening, doesn't look as material. Actually, against the original budget, it's another material underspend. And I think going into this budget, again, I think it's important and contextually we understand that for the last 2 years, the budget has led to a material underspend. There's always lots of different reasons for that, but it seems to me that those lots of always different reasons always seem to materialise at quite a significant level. That kind of feeds through to the sort of 3 critical points I want to make. So it'd be good to just understand what the scrutiny process was. So we've talked about zero-based budgeting, which is Mark and Asif know I'm a massive fan of, but I couldn't see what that zero-based budgeting had actually challenged, nor could I see what happened in terms of member scrutiny. Obviously, this year I wasn't involved in member scrutiny. And it kind of leads to, again, I went back through the papers to spec. When I looked at the Appendix 1, it refers at the top to Officer and Member Scrutiny as noted in section 6.1, which is a cut and paste from last year's appendix. But 6.1 in the report this year doesn't exist because it's adequacy of reserves. In last year's paper, we set out what the Officer and Member Scrutiny had led to, but that section has been removed in this year's paper. So last year, that budget process led to the professional investigator role, upgrades to the management system, contaminants management, community engagement, local training facility, and the highway and fire station options appraisal. So Marcus, could you just set out for us, did member scrutiny happen outside of this process at Executive Committee, and what were the things that changed and were amended in the budget, and similarly what did the zero-based budgeting lead to? Because I think we all need to recognise there's a slight, I don't know if an elephant in the room is the right phrase, but we've got a on-call consultation that is closed, where there are sort of two potential, at least two potential outcomes. One is that the proposals are progressed as set out in the consultation. Second is nothing happens. If nothing happens, then I assume that what the service will do is respond to recommendations of the FBU and the Fire and Rescue Association to invest in on-call. That's not built into the budget. Secondly, we have had discussions at both Executive and Fire Authority about the need to increase full-time firefighters. I know officers are doing the work on that, but we ought to be building into the budget a scenario about how we would afford in next year's budget and uplift in whole time. Officers have set out, I believe, a view that 330 is their instinctive judgment. I recognise that the detailed data work's being done. But again, it feels to me that a budget that isn't recognising those are two potential material changes in year, at least as a minimum, as scenarios set out in the budget, it feels like not the right thing to do. And so before this goes to the authority, I would like to see more detail about what's moving in the budget. Secondly, a scenario about, I feel very strongly we need to move whole-time establishment up to 330 See, what would that do to the budget next year? That should be set out in the budget that the authority approves, at least as a scenario. And then thirdly, a similar scenario about proper investment into on-call stations and into on-call headcount, again, set out as a scenario in the budget that the authority can see and understand.
Just invite Mark to comment on that. Clearly, there's a lot to cover there, and I certainly pick up on a number of those points myself. And I'm sure that some additional, more additional information than Mark is likely to be able to impart now might be required, and we can make those arrangements. But I'll leave it to Mark to respond in the meantime.
Yeah, I'll do my best to try and cover all those points.
Chair, before the officer speaks, can you explain the attendance of Councillor Sherwell to the meeting?
I can. My intention was to let this item finish and then do, but as you've intervened, I will happily do that. As I hope I've referred to, Councillor Sherwell substituting for Councillor Hussain. I was aware of potential late arrival due to some NHS requirements, and welcome Councillor Sherwell to join us at the meeting. So moving on, Mark.
Right, so I'll try my best to cover all of those. If I've missed anything, please do come back and let me know, but there will be some bits we'll need to provide outside the meeting for next week. In terms of the point round, it's forcing to raise preset. Yeah, we honestly haven't really got much choice. It's kind of the way the funding review has happened. As I've said, they've assumed in their figures that everyone is going to take the maximum increase. The flexibility is probably not the right word, but that's the word they've used. That's the word I've used, but yeah, accept your point. Movement since last year's budget, so I'm not sure what paper you're looking at. Maybe if you're looking at the original paper to the Fire Authority, we do at that meeting, we presented a revised Appendix 1 because of the late notification of business rates and council tax from the billing authorities, which we received after the initial papers were published. We have to update it to take into account those figures. Thankfully this year, because of the business rates reset, we've not needed to do that. So effectively just reset back to the baseline that was published through the provision settlement. So I think probably, as I'll pick this up outside the meeting and confirm to you, I think if we look at the revised appendix that was presented, that will agree to the opening approved budget that you see. Actually, as it's not in something.
Yes, I've checked that.
Right, yeah, okay. So that's that one. So yeah, apologies for the confusion there. It's just a timing issue with papers and deadlines. We'll come back to you with the detailed movements across some of those lines you mentioned. I think a lot of it is to do with, I think, operational training, moving from service delivery to the people directorate when Ronnie started his role. So it's movements, kind of internal restructuring, a lot of that, but we can do a more detailed breakdown of.
I'm sorry, where would that come from?
I think between service delivery into people, I think off the top of my head, we can clarify that. And in terms of some of the bigger movements you mentioned in future years, I think because service delivery is the largest line, we put notionally all the inflation into that line, but in reality it will spread across those lines and be split out in the future. It's just done for presentational convenience.
And that's over and above the inflation adjustment.
So
What was the over and above?
So Mark just said inflation has been built into the individual lines, but I was just asking, is that therefore over and above the inflation adjustment?
Yeah, it's inflation adjustment is inflation plus pay reviews as well. We've always just categorised it. So I'm more than happy to kind of go away from the thing and provide you detail. But one thing I can assure you is there wasn't much growth this year in terms of the budget. I'm sure officers around the room will tell you as well. We didn't really build much because of the fair funding review. Most of it will predominantly be around either restructures where teams have moved from one department to another, pay awards, the significant one that we split over, and inflation. The two key numbers that have changed really for us is inflation and pay awards this year. There really hasn't been much of the growth in the service.
And I think that's why understanding what's those movements gives us that confidence that that's exactly what's happening. Otherwise, if you read it, it does look like there's quite material movements in the individual budget lines.
yeah, it's a good question. We'll come back with the detail for the Fire Authority meeting on that one. Just in terms of some of the other points you picked up, so you mentioned the underspend and budget monitoring. So as I've mentioned, so predominantly that's driven a lot by the Treasury income. So we factored in, despite the forecast decrease in rates, we have actually increased the Treasury forecast. So our cash balances are actually better than forecast because of, for example, the delay in Westcott. That means we're holding more cash than we thought we might hold. So we've tried to factor that into, because we don't want to build in a systemic underspend, because that's not good budgeting practice. In terms of scrutiny process, so there was an information workshop held for members in early January where we ran through some of the detail and explained some of those movements, but so we can bring some of that back out for members. In terms of the scrutiny, we did it slightly differently this year. In previous years, we've invited officers to put forward growth bids, which members have then scrutinised. Because we knew the fair funding review was coming and because of the scenario we saw, we actually told officers not to prepare any growth bids this year, so there was no real growth to scrutinise. So hence we didn't have that detailed process. And apologies for the reference in the paper, as you said that probably is a hangover from the previous years. In terms of the bit around the whole time scenario, 330 is not a number I recognise. It may have been set by other officers, but it's not something I'm familiar with. We can show a scenario of what 330 would look like. It would be negative reserves. It would be absolutely kind of not feasible at this point in time. We'll come on to, when we talk about the consultation response in item 8, I think it is, around representations to the government, because the only scenario in which we could feasibly afford that would be to have either increased funding from central government or further council tax flexibility beyond the £5. Based on this current budget, 330 nowhere near affordable. And in terms of the on-call, we've deliberately taken the approach, because there is a consultation that was active at the time we prepared these papers. You're correct in that it's now closed. We didn't want to preempt anything there, so we deliberately haven't change any on-call figures. As has been said all along, the on-call is not about savings, so in either scenario it's about reinvesting in the on-call. Hope that's covered everything.
So
Carry on.
330 is definitely a number that has been shared, but recognise it might not be your number. So of course the other route to fund the 330 is to make reductions in other parts of the service, if that's felt to be the right thing, which is, and I think that needs to be part of the debate. I suppose, and just on the on-call, I think what I'm describing is, so don't have to re-debate about whether it's investment or not, but there is a scenario that is the implementation of the on-call recommendations or proposals that set out. There is a counter scenario, which is that the consultation makes clear that the public doesn't support those proposals, but therefore there should be still investment in on-call. It seems to me that members need to be in a position at the Fire Authority where we understand if those material changes happen in year, how would we facilitate them within the budget? That doesn't seem to me to be prejudicing the consultation. It's setting out two potential, call them extreme scenarios, but it's setting out two scenarios. Personally, I think I struggle to agree to put something in front of the authority that doesn't set that out. Similarly, on the whole time, I think members across this table have been clear we want to support an uplift in whole time members. We need to have visibility in next year's budget about what would that look like, what would we need to do, what would we need to believe to make that happen. So I'd like to propose, Chairman, an amendment to the recommendations that those two elements are, including, I think there's been agreement to put more detail about the movement in the budget lines, but those two elements are added to this, so that what we're approving for submission to the authority includes those scenarios.
Councillor Stashford.
Yeah, I'm both impressed and disappointed all at the same time. There's some very good points member raises, and he conflated several things with other things, and which is means it's difficult for anyone listening to this to actually comprehend that they are. If they were serious enough, and I think the points always are, any member raises the point they are serious, it would have been pretty useful to have them in the run into this thing, and I feel that officers would have been in a position to have been able to answer them more succinctly in the meeting. I also think that conflating, we discuss £5. I've sat here quite a number of years, and every government, it's always been a challenge financially. And every year we always have the situation where proceeding, we had to put £5 into the budget, which was, we were allowed to put in. We had the long discussions about balancing the budget. And we're not in year zero, we're in 2026. Year zero doesn't have to happen in local finances. So, and I feel that conflating this budget with the ongoing consultation, which the outcomes of it haven't come to this authority, is probably a little unwise and probably just a little bit political. And I think that those discussions do need to have had, and I think that we should be an evidence-based decision going forward. I am sat here, when I ever hear anyone talk about the finances as authority and how challenged it is, I can never move past the reason, one of the reasons this authority is financially challenged is the decision in 2015 to actually remove money from the budget. And that has set in course a situation for every year preceding that where we didn't finance that. And that is one of the reasons we have these decisions every year around finances, because we never precepted. In 2015, we cut the budget by 1%. It's a public record. And from that day to this day, we've been trying to recover our position. So when I say there's no year zero, it's a continuous challenge in postal government finances. I expect the nuance of words in any, whether it's flexible, fair funding, these are all political nuances of words which governments have used, successive governments have used these types of words. So the reality is there, and I really struggle to find the relation between what parishes do and what we do in the budget. So I would ask that if these points was so sincere, and I think they are sincerely made, no doubt about that, that it would have been in the run-up to this meeting had been scheduled, that they could have been prepared. And the reason I say that is because they're really worth discussing. They're really worth discussing, and I'm sure the member wants to discuss them, but it would have been much better if we'd had it in advance, because it was quite long, and I've spoken for quite a long time on purpose in retaliation, and I'm just trying to suggest that maybe that's it. And if the idea that you would put an amendment in on something that there's not a piece of paperwork to actually put an amendment in, you can't really put an amendment in if you haven't presented the paperwork to put the amendment in. So I think that probably falls just by procedural default, not by the merits. Why my original suggestion was maybe something in advance would have been really good. I probably spoke long enough, but I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. To try and move this forward, we have a proposal. Before we move to whether that's seconded or not, just in response to Councillor Rice, I've already said that I recognise the need perhaps to have some further information. I don't think it's appropriate to amend these recommendations. These are simply recommendations to move something to the authority. You have had a vocal response from the Director of Finance, who has also said Mark is happy to produce a supplementary paper or reflect your concerns in the papers to the authority. With that in mind, I ask you to consider that as acceptable rather than we can happily note that these should be reflected in the paper, but in order to move forward, that we simply move the recommendations to the authority.
So, can I?
Yes.
So firstly, it strikes me as odd that we wouldn't want to have a transparent discussion about this. So Councillor Stutchbury's point.
Well,
sorry, just that's Councillor. So just to be clear, I'm very happy for more detail to be built in around the movement in the budget in the paper. That I'm fine with. My concern, and hence why I want this amendment, is unless we set out a clear strategic intent that we want to see investment in whole-time firefighters into next year's budget for the fire authority to look at and understand. It is my view, built on experience, that that will therefore not happen unless we do that. Secondly, we also need to set out what the scenario about investment in on-call, in either scenario, no change, but investing, change as set out in the proposals, would look like to the budget. It cannot be a credible budget that we're approving, knowing that those are two pretty material elements that I think collectively we all want to see happen. So therefore, I do want to add an amendment that we have a scenario that looks at the increase to 330 whole-time firefighters, what that would do to the budget and how we might fund it. And secondly, an investment programme in on-call.
Anyone
Sure,
else
that'd be second.
comment on that? Councillor Sedgwick, let's see if anybody else wants to comment.
I'll second the proposal.
Councillor Twisley.
Thank you, Chairman. I think what you're saying, Simon, is quite plausible in terms of looking at scenarios. But one thing I certainly remember, and I'm sure public record will attest to, is that we as an authority agreed to uplift whole-time equivalents. I think we did this a couple of months ago from my memory. But I wonder whether, rather than saying 330, we look at what is plausible from the financial point of view according to the forecast. Because I'm sure that, you know, due to, and I know that Ronnie and myself have discussed this, the fluctuation in terms of seasonal staff in relation to on-call will have an effect on what is plausible. So I'm agreeing with you in the sense that we need to have some sort of scenario, but I wonder whether 330 is what we need to be looking at. Just a point.
Councillor Sedgwick.
Following on, colleague, absolutely understand, and I feel that everyone around here wants to employ as many people in the right places as possible to create the best service. We have in the room, which is a result of a consultation, the findings and the feeding from the union and everybody else. We really need to read that. We really need to predict our planning around the outcome of that consultation, because it's not about cuts, it's not about finances. But there's been plenty of information out in the public that hasn't been accurate and has been inaccurate and assumptions made. So I think we must stick to what we know is accurate and what we know is taking place and what actually is real. Because some of the information that's been out there has been not real and not accurate and not correct. So I think that the point made about we've already done that, would it be a reasonable suggestion that once the outturn of the consultation is worked through, which is the findings, the objectives, which is to create a better, safer service, that these things are worked into there, and it could be that part of that findings and work done on that would mirror the suggestions, which is no new suggestion of increasing farthing. Because if it was easy to have increased them, we wouldn't be in the position of discussing about increasing them. And if we want to discuss why we increased them, we ought to then discuss why we decreased them in the first place. So, as I said, we're not in year zero, we're in year 2026, and all decisions taken before affected today. So I think that we have to wait for that, and to prejudge the outcome of something would be in danger of prejudging the decision which we're not made.
Thank you, Councillor Sedgwick. Councillor Rouse, do you have a form of words? You have indicated that you wish an amendment. It's been seconded, but we haven't got a form of words.
Yep. So we can add it as an amendment to B, that the revenue budget should include.
Could you just, so I can write it?
That the revenue budget should include a scenario analysis
Scenario analysis.
of increasing whole-time establishment up to 330. And I think that, on that point, I think therefore picks up Councillor Priest's point. Secondly, secondly was me saying second. A further scenario setting out the impact of implementing the current on-call improvement proposals and a scenario of investment where those proposals are not approved by the fire authority.
Okay, so, yeah, indeed. So we'll move to a vote on that. Before we do so, I have to say, as we have no idea where the figure of 330 comes from.
Sorry.
We don't know where the figure of 330 comes from. I'm not aware that we've discussed it, certainly in my time on the authority. I find it difficult to, I'm conscious of the fact that we've already agreed that additional information can be provided prior to the authority meeting. I think also that some of these things will inevitably be discussed when we get to the March meeting of the authority, where a wider context will be covered. Remember, I think we're moving to, well, we're going to debate the motion. A succinct input from you, Councillor Stutchbury, would obviously be.
I would put an amendment along the lines that what the chair suggests, that noting comments that additional information directed around the questions will be provided at the precept.
Well, I think we could do that by a note in addition to the recommendation. If you forgive me, I think that would be acceptable to achieve that objective. I think what we should do now is move to the vote on the amendment. So those in favour of the amendment, if you want Katie to read it.
Well, they could show of hands otherwise. I can read it if they want me to read it.
You happy?
Do you want me to read it?
Can I just come back, Chairman, as the seconder?
My apologies.
Oh, no problem at all. The reason why I'm seconding the motion, particularly on the higher figure of whole-time firefighters, is purely to the politicians in the room. And I'm talking on the Buckinghamshire Council side in particular, because we know the scale of growth that is coming. We can see the scale of growth that is coming, and it is coming, if you split the county into east and west, the western side being the Chiltern Hills and all those towns and villages in the green belt. It's not going that side, it's coming this side. So Princess Visborough, Haddenham, Aylesbury, Winslow, Buckingham, all that kind of area. And when I say we're looking at significant growth in that western part of Buckinghamshire Council area, we are talking tens of thousands towards 100,000 properties. So potentially we would be looking at whole-time provision in Winslow, particularly. We'd be looking at whole-time provision in Princess Visborough, and we'd be looking at additional support here in Aylesbury, possibly Haddenham even. These things have all got to be explored. Obviously, as you said before, Chairman, houses don't get built next week. They get built over a period of time. But this authority needs to be planning now so that we are in step with the growth that's coming. We don't want to be caught out in years to come where we haven't planned for it. As Robin said, the decision's taken a long, long time ago. In fact, probably a lot of those people are dead. It's so long ago that you're talking about.
Don't forget.
We need to be in step. We don't want to be caught out not planning far enough ahead. So now's the time to start planning. Now's the time to start planning, Chairman. Hence, that's why I'm very comfortable to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. It might be pertinent if I added some information on that particular point, since you've raised it. As I have said previously, the authority responded to the Regulation 18 submission of Buckinghamshire Council and the Regulation 19 submission of the Milton Keynes City Authority. I have written to both the corporate director and the cabinet member for planning and Buckinghamshire Council, requesting a meeting for the Deputy Chief Fire Officer and I to discuss the very things you have raised, and been advised that they are not yet ready for such a meeting. We are, therefore, I can assure you very much, well, I think it's fair to say we're ahead of the game as far as our concern and understanding of that growth is concerned. You said yourself, these houses aren't going to arrive tomorrow. This is a plan for the next 20 years as far as housing is concerned. And to some extent, the same applies at Milton Keynes, though they are further ahead. So we couldn't be, it's impossible to have done more than the observatory has. That said, unless we have any further contributions to the debate, Councillor Bailey, please.
I mean, I'd just like to, support the general concept of raising whole time. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But, in light of what the chair has said, and the house is not appearing tomorrow, and that there is still a piece of work to be done by the fire service to better understand that figure. And the Director of Finance has told us that we cannot afford a number of 330 at this time. I'm sorry, I find it very difficult to support this vote at this time.
We don't know that though, because we haven't seen the scenario analysis. That's what this amendment is. It's giving us the option as members to understand that. I don't know how we have a budget where we aren't exploring that. That's the key point about this amendment.
Well, if we're going to carry on.
Sorry, Chair, I apologise. No, I apologise. I should have been.
So, well, I won't add further to it. I suggest that we now move to the vote. You have you've heard the proposed amendment, which has been seconded. Those in favour of the amendment? Those against the amendment? The amendment fails. Nevertheless, Councillor Rouse, I would add a personal note. Thank you for your input. I think there's been some useful points raised, and I trust that the Director of Finance will be able to reflect much of your concerns in the So the recommendation.
Chair, I'm coming on something else. We've got the amendment. We talked about that. And there's other points.
Well, I was about to move the recommendations, but
well, can I make a comment on?
Go on.
Section 4.3 refers to the Town Valley Fire Control Service. It's interesting to know that the increase of 38k per annum, we only get it is now proposed to go to 1.052. But what is the actual increase in percentage terms? And also the additional 40,000 per annum, which the replacement can come command control. So I find it a bit short in what's the government, when was the decision made by whom, and who's challenged it, and are we delegating powers to the representatives to actually agree that, just of understanding where it came from, Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that budget's been approved by the Thames Valley Joint Control Room back in December, and it's my understanding that the Joint Control Room had members from all three services. They've made that decision. I'm more than happy to share those papers with you to give you more detail of what that budget consists of and what the capital programme is. I'm more than happy to share that with your members.
I think that would be helpful to know what the percentage increase is, rather than just 38k going to, and the rationale why the extra 14,000 was being put in the pot for the replacement of the current system.
I'm more than happy to share that paper with your members so they've got sight of that.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. No more points to add to. Okay, then I'll move the recommendations. First, it's recommended that The following are approved for submission to the authority. And that is the report and statement of the Chief Finance Officer is noted that the council tax precept of £89.46 for a Band D equivalent property equals to an increase of approximately 10p per week. The revenue budget as set out in Appendix 1B approved, again for submission to the authority. The capital programme as set out in Appendix 2 approved similarly. Those in favour? Against? Any abstentions? 3 abstentions, noted. Thank you, everyone.
Graham said we just need a second for that.
Second.
We move to page 31, item 7 on your agenda for the Prudential's Code. I'd like Marcus Hussey to present that paper.
Thank you. Good morning, members, officers. Today I'm presenting you with the Prudential Code, Prudential Indicators and Minimum Revenue Provision for financial year 26-27. This is a technical paper and presented annually to this committee to approve the recommendations with final approval at the next fire authority meeting. The Prudential Code was established to ensure capital investment plans are affordable, prudent and sustainable, and that treasury management decisions are taken in accordance with good professional practice. The Prudential indicators presented here demonstrate that the current plans for capital investment meet the criteria and present an acceptable level of risk for the authority. The minimum revenue provision is a statutory charge to the general fund, to the revenue budget, which ensures that the authority has sufficient cash balances to repay borrowing upon maturity, reducing the refinancing risk. The authorised limit for borrowing and other long-term liabilities has been set to 2.5 million above the operational boundary limit to allow for effective management of cash flow and accounting for the lease liabilities following the implementation of BFRS 16 this financial year. This paper supports the MTFP we've been since today, and according to the MTFP, there are no plans for additional borrowing. However, set out in the MTFP in 27-28, the authority is forecasting to reverse the voluntary revenue provision set aside in 15-16 of 3.5 million to support the capital programme set out in the MTFP. This has been factored into the potential indicators shown in the appendix. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that, Marcus. Do we have any questions to Marcus, Councillor?
So just a couple of questions. So I'm sure this is the right level. So I'm not questioning. I'm just conscious that there's a risk with this Prudential paper that sometimes we don't we sort of let stuff roll over without asking self-wise. So the 2.5 million authorised limit that you're asking that we set on the operational boundary limit, which obviously is the one that we set in prior years. Can you just give us some context as to why that is the right level, why it shouldn't be lower and why it shouldn't be higher, and what the implications of that would be? So I'm sure it's the right limit. I just think it's important we check ourselves in on understanding it. And then I'm always intrigued by the graph, which is on page 37 of the pack, which is the debt position of the fire authorities, where obviously we continue to have one of the lowest debts of any fire authority. And obviously, I think it was 2 years ago, wherever we took a decision to pay down some more debt. Just again, could you just talk us through kind of what was your recent review of that debt position? Is there a case developing again for either paying down further that debt, or is it in fact, particularly given the scale of some of the capital investment that we want to do, etc., is there a case building that actually our debt position, there is some room for manoeuvre for us to potentially look at that, I don't know where rates, etc. are. So just again, just give us a bit more of a context on our debt position.
I'll take the first question around the boundary limits. So we currently have a borrowing of 4.5 million. And we also have a lease liability of around 1.6 million. So total them together, gives you that figure. And to allow us a bit of buffer, just in case there is a time in the year where we have to potentially borrow, where we've got our capital investments in fixed term deals. We've given ourselves a buffer of 2 million just in case we have to borrow on the short term, whether it's a week or two. So we've got that flexibility. The other 500,000 has been set aside following the implementation of IFRS 16. It means we have leases. Means we have to now account for all of our leases as right of use assets, and it's a new thing. We are learning as we go along. We've had input from auditors as well to help us with this. We've got ourselves in a position where we think we've got it right. That buffer of 500k allows for the potential lease of Westcott as well, which we haven't factored into the figures. So we give ourselves a bit of a buffer there. I don't know if Mark wants to come in on the second thing.
Yeah, just in terms of PWP debt, so we're not planning to pay down further because, as Mark has mentioned, the voluntary revenue provision reversal, essentially we're internal borrowing, so we're kind of using that money which we had. So we set aside the money fully to repay it. We hadn't repaid it because of the rates. We're now saying we're going to unset aside that money to fund the capital programme. So no plans to repay any PWP. Longer term, probably outside of the NTFP, we may be looking into external borrow, because as you see from the NTFP, our capital reserves by the end of it go from 14 million down to about £2 million. There's going to be other capital works that need to happen in the next 5 years. So that'll be a consideration for kind of 5 years plus potential more borrowing if it's needed to invest.
And sorry, Mark, what's the mechanism by which, because that feels to me like a really important strategic discussion and debate for the authority, what's the mechanism by which we'd start to have that discussion?
It would be through the potential indicators, which always get presented alongside the budget. We'd have to increase our boundaries to enable us to borrow, because as officers, we can only borrow within those approved limits.
Okay.
Are there any further questions on that? Ms. Pepper? Thank you. Now I'll move to the recommendations again. We approve the recommendations for submission to the fire authority. And that is recommend to approve the prudential indicators for 26-27 and 2, the minimum revenue provision policy statement. All those in favour? Thank you. Was that a yes, councillor? Yes. Thank you. Okay, moving on then to item 8, response to the provisional government settlement. The paper shows the service's response to the provisional settlement, the impact of which is clearly already been covered in some detail under item 6. Given the impact of the notional council tax adjustment on the level of funding receivable, it's perhaps unsurprising that our response to the allocation methodology and council tax referendum principles are the 2 key areas of disagreement. Our response in relation to council tax referendum principles aligns with the response made on behalf of the National Fire Chiefs Council. Due to the timing and length of the consultation, I bear in mind it was, I think, 4 weeks, including the 2-week Christmas break. And in accordance with the scheme of delegation of officers, the response was discussed with me and the lead member before submission. The paper details the content of the submission for the attention of the committee. It's a good read. You may, I'll invite Mark to make any specific comments that he wishes to add.
Probably not much to add in terms of the letter itself, just some local context I picked up recently in terms of there's only 2 fire authorities that set a lower council tax precept bandy than us. One is West Midlands, one is Northamptonshire. West Midlands actually did quite favourably out there. Their funding review, their non-council tax income has gone up significantly. Northamptonshire are actually on their budget papers discussing a precept increase of either £5 or £12. They've written to the government to ask for additional flexibility, although they have said they will not trigger a referendum, so we'll only go with £12 if available. But that's just to give some context, kind of actually how tight it is for some services. So we'll be keeping a kind of a close eye on how that one plays out, because if they were to get any additional flexibility, we'd obviously want to push even harder for that in future years. Because at the moment, that's probably the real route to increasing kind of level of investment in the service. Because as a fire service, notwithstanding Councillor Stutchery's point around, we may get some income from Westcott. the only real substantial lever we've got for increasing the funding is unfortunately through increasing council tax. I can take any questions on any specific points.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Yeah, thank you for the paper and thank you for where we are. I'm very interested in, like you made about Northamptonshire, it's only just up the road from me. I'm not sure whether their Doge budgeting quite worked out as it should be. I think that they found that the stark realities of budgeting to run councils, whichever you political persuasion, is quite difficult. I think they've had a discovery and epiphany of reality now. I think that we need to sort of look at what does come out about that, because it'd be quite interesting and probably unlikely that they'll get special dispensation. Because, you know, Northamptonshire, we know Northamptonshire situation and their fire services, the way they deliver the services is very different to ours in some ways. And the way the councils have just merged into unitaries is the case of two unitaries, one fire authority. So will we get an early sight of that? And I think any member of Parliament across the board would be interested if Northamptonshire was able to breach the silent covenant of government funding. I am interested in that, because there is a real question in the room here, isn't there, that we shouldn't be celebrated. I know in one way politically people celebrate a low precept, but the reason we have a low precept is historical. As I said earlier, historical decisions taken before, and it's been a problem for us. And we are not, because there's been well management of the finances, and that we're not in a position other people are. We got any information why they're needing to put a 12% in, or looking to put 12% in, on how they're going to do that? Because you would struggle to come here and tell us we're going to put 12% in and make a case for it. So I really think we need to understand that, because that will have a really, not this year, but next year, if it happens, we can plan differently.
So just for clarity, it's 12, it's not 12% is one of their proposals. Northants, so they originally were part of the county council. When the county council split into two units, say the fire service popped out, they've had a really historically low precept, and they started with kind of zero reserves when they popped out. So they are quite a particular financial situation. I'm not an expert on what their financials are, but obviously we'll keep a keen interest on it. If there is kind of additional flexibility, it does make the case for us kind of having additional flexibility in the future. The key bit we're getting penalised on is because our banding is so far below the notional average. We effectively get penalised because our funding settlement is based on what council tax we could in theory raise if we're at the average. So we're getting penalised for that, but we've got no flexibility to try and catch up to the average. So that's the real thrust of the letter that's before you, is if you're saying we should be at the average, give us the mechanism to work towards that average. At the moment, if it's £5, we're just going to move in step and we're not going to get any closer. So that's the main thrust.
Well, thank you for the clarity. I misunderstood when you said 12%, and that makes a huge difference.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, as Simon mentioned earlier, the council tax bill and the relationship with the fire service and the parish and town councils. I mean, in many, many instances, parish and town council precept is far, far higher than our quite modest precept. And as Robin, eloquently says, we are very underfunded here, but we precept far too low for the service that we're trying to deliver. So I wonder, Mark, through the chair, do you talk to your counterparts? I know in that bottom section of that lead cable where we're all, scraping the bottom, do you speak to your counterparts in those other services? Maybe we do a coordinated approach to the Home Office and try and get some flexibility.
Yeah, so we've done a coordinated approach through the National Fire Chiefs Council, and our response is based quite heavily on their response, because you want to try and get all fire services saying the same things. If you've got different fire services saying different things, Home will say, or MHCLG will say you don't really know what you want. It was interesting that when the provisional settlement was presented in Parliament, they made a special case for, I think it was 6 London boroughs, who had extremely low council tax, them to have unlimited preset flexibility, not in this coming year, but in the year after. If you were to apply the same criteria to those London boroughs, take that criteria and apply it to fire services, we would meet that criteria for being able to increase our preset by that amount. So that's the argument we're making, is apply that same treatment to the London boroughs to us. Because I think the fair funding settlement, and this is a personal view, I think fire services are an unintended consequence of that. I think it was designed a lot around the London boroughs that have really, really low council tax. So the person in Westminster is paying on a band H, is paying less than someone on a band D up north somewhere. It's trying to reset that, and we've been caught up in that. So what we need is that flexibility to kind of unpick that, as you say, put ourselves back in the funding position that we should have. Because at the moment, we're getting less than the government says that we should in terms of their funding assessment.
Councillor Sherwell.
Yeah, firstly, apologies for being late, but I had a thorough review of my medication, which I couldn't afford to miss. It seems to me that there's a slightly complex issue that's all tying together here. We are growing. When those houses are built, and the fire authority's area has been growing greatest, of course, because Milton Keynes is in it. When those houses are built, we get an increased council tax from those, but we have to provide the fire service for that area effectively as the houses are being built before we get the money for it. That puts us as a fire authority in a different position from many other fire authorities who have a relatively stable population to deal with. Is there, not now obviously for this year, but is there a possibility of getting together with the few other fire authorities that also have our sort of rate of growth and pushing for some special treatment so that we can actually get the resource in advance to put the service in advance of the buildings actually physically being there and occupied? And that also, of course, fits in with the argument we were having before, discussion we were having before about the borrowing limit. Because one way to do that, obviously, is to borrow. So in the short term, we try to pay back from the council tax when you get it. And that may be more complicated. But is there a possibility of us getting together with those other areas and seeing whether there is a special case that can be made for future research?
I don't know if other areas are kind of growing more or less than us. I think probably a lot of services have seen a lot of growth in a lot of areas. Again, we'll do that for the National Fire Chiefs Council. That's the main mechanism for coordinating. But you hit on a kind of a really key issue. In terms of long-term growth, it depends where that growth is. So if it's around current centres of population, so you're expanding, I don't know, Aylesbury, Haddon, Prince Elizabeth, outwards, where we've already got stations,
yeah,
actually we can scale up staff fairly quickly. We can just do a bigger recruitment programme and we can react to that. At the moment, we're not seeing that growth come through in terms of council tax. So as I said, our council tax base growth assumption for the last number of years has been 1.6%. This year, we've only seen 1.28% in growth in council tax. So it's not coming through yet, but if we see it starting to come through, that's when we can scale up operational whole-time and on-call numbers if we need to. Where it gets a bit trickier is if you build a brand new population centre where we don't have a station, say like a greenfield, brownfield development in the middle of nowhere, you then it would take the time to build up the station. That's where you have to put in a significant amount of capital investment. And that's where we'd be looking to get either Section 106 or SIL money to help build those facilities. And that's where we really need the support. And that, at the moment, that's difficult to access because generally new growth doesn't add much more risk if it's around existing stations. It's when it's in the middle of nowhere and we have to build a whole new station. That's where we get a bit more longer term planning will be required.
Thank you.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Yeah, just around the whole point. We are in this process. We are Buckinghamshire Council is working through delivering a development plan. We don't know where the sites are yet. not, we may see where the dots on the maps are going to be, but that doesn't mean they're going to be sites. So even then, we're talking further down the road, and then we are advised, and I'm sure it's the same in Milton Keynes, that there have been infrastructure documents supporting the development plan. From our point of view, the important thing is just in this room, what we're representing is to make sure that infrastructure plan is robust enough to take into account growth, because growth should fund and developer should contribute to the cost of whatever there's to new development. We don't know what there's going to be. The other point being around the whole situation of this is there's so much uncertainty in the way that these houses will be delivered. The government, no government has since the 50s and 60s been a developer. So it's all reliant on private development, and we don't know where it is. And also there's a thing which is a hidden problem for us in North Buckinghamshire, which colleagues over there made the point about where growth might take place, and I think they were not wrong, is we haven't got sill in North Buckinghamshire. So we're relying on antiquated Section 106 agreements, predicted agreements, where there's not a policy that says this amount of money is set to that. So we really need to take it on board, I think, is to push forward that this sill policy needs to come in, because without sill in North Buckinghamshire, likes of this authority, you can then say, well, we need the hospital, we need the, and all those sort of things will probably get funded from the sill. Also the sill policy, of course, with neighbourhood plans, 25% of the uptake will go to people with neighbourhood plan and 15% of it. So we live in a very uncertain time, and everybody wants that pot of sill. So I hope that what we are learning from this is that we need to be pushing the Buckinghamshire Council to get sill in place in North Buckinghamshire for everybody's interest, and we need to be assured that they are aware that any growth agreed, which is their decision, we're not here as Buckinghamshire, we are here as whatever we are, but they're going to be making those decisions, that they are naturally aware and take some responsibility within that planning of that development of which they've got to do infrastructure, is laying out where they believe those sites should be. At that point, for the growth being, we need to then go ahead to head towards that growth and see how we work to deliver that. But we aren't got that information, and I don't think any colleagues on Buckinghamshire Council would think that we're anywhere close to having it until 2027 or at the earliest. That won't be the plan necessarily. So we are very much all in the air. So I think the sill question is a big one for North Buckinghamshire, and Milton Keynes has sill. South Buckinghamshire has two sill policies, one under the Wickham sill policy and one under the Chiltern and South Bucks sill policy. They've got policies, but they're not necessarily going to be where the growth is. So I think from our point of view, a question of urgency to Buckinghamshire Council to get on and introduce sill in North Buckinghamshire will make our planning so much easier.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Councillor Priestley.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, Robin, you've taken the words right out of my mouth, because I wanted to ask whether sill had been implemented in North Bucks, because actually, when you look at your point, Mark, about forecasting and planning, sill makes that a lot more easier. And I wondered what was going on in the north of the county around that issue. That was it.
I just clarify then, the former Hillsborough Vale District Council area does not have sill. It's still relying solely on Section 106, developers' voluntary contributions. And I think, yeah, Councillor Hall next. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Yeah, rather than call it North Buckinghamshire, I prefer to call it East and West, so it captures everything in the detail, because Buckinghamshire kind of goes off at an angle, and the Chiltern Hills side of it is all in the green belt, and that's where the majority of our fire stations are. They're in the green belt. So the growth areas, all we have are Princes Risborough Adnam, Aylesbury, Winslow, Buckingham, I think, Umbrill, sorry. So we don't have many fire stations in the growth area. They're all in the Greenbelt area, which isn't getting any growth. So, you know, it's key really, as Robin says, the seal money in the S106 and how we plan for that.
Just through you, Chair, Gary, would you think it's unreasonable, thinking from this authority, that we ask for a tribute along with getting that policy? Because there are mechanisms in legal mechanisms, and I have questioned this in the other place. Health facilities, and how we plan, and without SIL, strategic planning those, it doesn't matter who does the strategic planning, they're all going to be doing it for the right reason. Do you think it's unreasonable that we express our concern that SIL hasn't been delivered yet, in a not an aggressive manner, but a practical business type manner that we need it?
Well, my understanding is it'll be part of the local plan when it's adopted in a couple of years.
Well, it's possible that it might come
Earlier.
forward earlier, but discussion with what's going on screen. It's all part of the proposed discussion with the cabinet member and the corporate director. As far as I think we should treat Buckinghamshire separately as far as this is concerned, because we know a great deal more as far as Milton Keynes is concerned. We're confident that we have a handle on that. But they're not ready to tell us, so we await further from them. The ball is very much in the council's court on that moment. Do I have any further points to make on this? The recommendation is that the response to the consultation be noted. Are we content with that? Thank you. Move on to item 9, the budget monitoring report. This sets up the latest in-year revenue and capital monitoring position as at the end of December 25. Forecast is that the net revenue underspend will be 165,000 by the end of the financial year. The significant variances within this figure, and we seem to be constantly referring to variances, are an overachievement of treasury income against budget, lower than forecast employee costs due to vacant posts, and a reduction in our airwave costs following the ruling of the Competition and Markets Authority. All of the above mean that it will no longer be necessary to utilise the £500,000 transfer from reserves, which has already been referred to. That was originally forecast would be needed to balance the budget for the year. Since the last update to members, the capital programme is showing an increase in the amount of budget that will be carried forward to 26-27, and this is likely to increase further following subsequent information, as we've said, about the status with Westcott, when we'll actually be required to spending the money, as it were. So if Asif would like to follow through with more detail.
Thank you. I think you've covered most of it, I'm being honest, but the one that I did want to kind of just emphasise and highlight today was the addition of the treasury table in 1.2. As you've seen on there, it kind of tells you what our treasury budget was for the year, which was 600,000, and we're actually achieving kind of 1.2 million. Now that's an overachievement, and that overachievement results in an underspend. So it's how we want to kind of illustrate that. If I want to be honest, without that overachievement, we wouldn't be in an underspend position. And the reason for that overspend, as alluded to, overachievement, as alluded to earlier, was predominantly because of having capital funds available that hadn't been spent throughout the year. So when we set the treasury budget last year, we assumed we'd have average investment value of around 15 million, and we'd return an average rate of return around 4%. That would give us the 600k. In reality, we've had funds in the region of around 28 million. That's nearly double, because 6 million of that relates to Westcott, and we've also had additional pension grants that still haven't been paid out yet. Those are in the region around 70 million. And what we've tried to do as a service is maximise those returns. We know where we've got those extra funds in, so we've tried to bring that treasury income in, and that's why we're overachieving. And that has a massive impact on the underspend. Without that overachievement, we wouldn't be in an underspend position. And And also in terms of treasury as well, it's a real difficult one. It fluctuates year on year to try and build it into the base. When we've got investment funds, we get good returns in, but when those investment funds reduce because we're investing them in our capital program, we're not going to achieve the same level of treasury return. So the way we've always utilised treasury returns is we've always used it as a mechanism to increase our capital reserves and our capital cost, because it's not like your council tax. It's not built into the base, and it's not something that we can utilise effectively for future planning. And I just wanted to kind of illustrate that bit. But apart from that, I think we've already spoken about the employee costs, obviously having an impact on the industry, and obviously the higher treasury income and the yearly income that we've got. In terms of capital, obviously you see a significant reduction in the capital programme and a significantly higher slippage, but again that relates to Westcott. So obviously we're not expecting the planning permission to come through until the end of March. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Chairman. The finance sector referenced earlier about not building in systemic underspends, totally agreed. But for every year I've sat on this authority, we have ended up with what I consider material, overspends. Systemic overspends was the phrase used. Well, you don't want to build it either. Yeah. But that is my point, which is that, sorry, I was just about to credit you with the opposite argument. Whereas the opposite's happening, which is that every year I've sat on this authority, we have ended up with material underspends. Last year was just under £1 million. We're projecting here against the budget. Recognise the reserve movement doesn't need to happen, but against the budget, 867. This is based on December's outturn. I'll get to that in a second. I think from memory, but I'm happy to be corrected. The prior year was something like 300,000 underspend. And that matters because it means there are things we could have done in the year to either increase whole time establishment, etc., that we haven't done. When we get to some of the performance indicators in a bit, I just think there are some concerning trends starting to develop about availability, about open the border, about bank shifts that we just kind of need to really just challenge ourselves. And I accept, as in every budget, in every organisation, there are always moving parts, and you need to exercise judgment about what those moving parts are. But it does feel to me like something around the way that we're thinking about investment income, about the way we're thinking about staff costs, which again, we always significantly underspend on staff costs, isn't quite working. And my concern about it is that it's stopping us from doing some things that we should do. So a couple of questions. We are in February, so we've effectively got 2 months left. What do you, recognising that I think virtually every month the underspend has been moving upwards. Last report it was 139k was the underspend that was being projected. What do you anticipate as we sit here today, the end of financial year underspend will be prior to removing the reserves? And secondly, what would 30 firefighters, an increase of 30 firefighters on the whole time establishment cost us?
I don't, to be honest, in terms of trying to comment what the overspend's going to look like now, I think we've got to kind of play out what the financial year looks like and we'll report it more accurately. I don't want to commit to a figure in this meeting. In terms of firefighters, let's put it into perspective. We said earlier about 30 firefighters. Just on salary costs, you're looking at around £1.8 million. £1.8 million. You're looking on average around 60k per kind of firefighter on cost. Now, the difficulty with it is that I know you've spoken about underspends, and I'm sure we've explained what those underspends have come about. And in most cases, the common theme has been treasury. Now, if treasury to this year is 1.2 million, and we now building 25 fires because we think we're going to get 1.2 million, but next year it drops down to 600k. We won't. That's not built into the base, and that's what I'm fearful in terms of trying to use treasury as a mechanism to increase our establishment. And I'm being totally honest. We've got to look at the data for the last few years, and when you kind of emphasise the underspend, you've got to look at exactly where that underspends come from, and you'll find there'll be key themes in there. There'll be scenarios that have played out that we couldn't plan for, whether it's additional income due to treasury or the underspends elsewhere. On-call is a primary one that you regularly see underspends in, And that's because we've never been able to recruit to our full establishment. So it's context for me is quite important. And unfortunately, I'm not in a position now to be able to give you all the data for the last 3-4 years. But I can assure you, whenever underspend predominantly have happened, it's either because establishment on-call is a major factor, treasury, or there's been things that have happened in year that we could not potentially have planned for. Additional income, we've had like the Motorola income coming in the past few years, the one-offs, we've had business rates kind of coming, income coming. There's so many different factors. To just kind of generalize it as an underspend, I really wouldn't be able to do it justice today to be able to explain that in more detail because I don't have that in front of me. But I can assure you, in most cases, for the majority of the underspend, there has been valid reasons for it, and treasury might have been a common theme as well.
Thank you, Asik. I think that's very helpful, particularly your point about one-off situations. We can't plan for the future based on that sort of potential. Do you have any further points to raise? Councillor Rouse, will you?
So I run a multi-million pound organisation. I understand prudent budgeting. The point I'm just trying to articulate that I don't want to get lost is this is becoming a trend. So we, at our peril, ignore the fact. I accept there are one-off movements, but there are also some recurring patterns in the way that the budget is underspending. We need to make sure we are looking at those patterns to identify what are the trends that we can anticipate in future budget setting, because this is money that we could potentially have been deploying to move the service forward. I understand how investment income works. I understand the risks and I understand the upsides of investment income, but something is not quite working in the way that we're looking at that. Also, we are getting the staff cost projections wrong when you look at the movement in the tables. So I think we'll get into this a bit more detail next week when we do the budget. I do think we just need, I personally, as a member of this committee and as a member of the Fire Authority, just want to get greater confidence that the projections in the budget that we're being asked to approve next week and for next year do not have the same materiality of underspend that we've experienced certainly in the last 2, if not the last 3. That's just the core point I'm making. I'm not trying to say that it isn't difficult. Financial budgets are difficult, but we have to also worry about underspend as much as we worry about overspend.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Sherwell and Councillor.
Yeah, it seems to me there are 2 separate things within what Councillor Rice is saying. The principle is obviously right. If there's a systematic underspending something year on year, then we need to have an analysis as to why that's the case. And I would be very surprised if our finance people don't do that automatically. But there's a second issue, which is here we've had some increased income, which is effectively a one-off because of something that happened during the year, which is the pushing back of Westcott particularly, but brought us in money that it would not have been reasonable to put in the budget in the first place and won't occur in future years. There is a question about how quickly we can react to that and whether there is sensible short-term spending to tackle some other problems that can be done with the money. Now, I'm not sure how quickly we can react to that, and I don't want to discuss that now. I just put it here on the record, so to speak. But if we've got additional income that is a one-off, that can't be used for future planning and stuff because it won't recur, are there sensible short-term things we can do with it?
Point taken. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Spencer.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Very, 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 very succinct and practical. I've sat here under 3 different chairs of our authority, and the same issues about underspend has come up on various points of discussion around it. The commonality of those discussions is very much as you described it. It's unexpected income, not planned income. It's things that happened in investments come back to us or don't come back to us. And your point you made, which is a strong one, that we needs to be noted strongly, that it's £1 million to get extra into our budget to get those people that we all would love to employ. Very strong point, needs to be noted. it's a factual point given to us by an officer. That's £1 million, which we would have to find some way of putting on, which goes back to the point raised by Mark about the how we can budget in the future, maybe. So they're factual points. So no point in all that time has anyone found it. And if we're going to do the job properly, we should go back and look historically why we reduced firefighters in previous years. We did. To go have a look historically where we were. What I'm saying, there was not increases in reduced, we didn't increase it. And why we didn't increase the firefighters that we employed. I think there's some evidence there because, you know, history teaches you what you learn. It also teaches you what might happen again. And it also shows you where you may need to go. Because history is a truism, isn't it? So I think we need to look at that. But I think the points you made about the £1 million to crew, 1.8 million pounds that we'd have to raise to actually meet that objective has to stay in the room if we're going to repeat the analysis, because we then have to do a whole analysis how we're going to raise £1.8 million to meet that. And I think everyone around here would like to do that. But I think Mark's points, as I said earlier, about looking at how we're financed and in the future, that might be something we could address. And if we all sit here long enough, we'd have consecutive chairs of the firefighter. I have been sat here under 3 chairs and the same questions come up very many times. So that said, but thank you, Chief, for addressing those issues. Well-made questions and well-made responses.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Any further comments on this?
Chair, can I just come back on a few points? Thank you. So thank you, that's really helpful debate. Yeah, I get your point around underspend and overspends are kind of equally bad, as it were, because an underspending missed opportunity. You're very right, you could have done something else with that money. Generally, what we'll do with the underspend is at the end of the year, the underspend will go into the capital programme. That's why we're able to afford kind of the Westcotts, the Wickhams that we're planning for. In terms of the systemic bit, if you look at the table on page 101, you can see we're actually overspending on whole-time staff, and that's because we've been consistently above the establishment of 300 for the year. Where we tend to have the underspends, and we get it most years, is on support staff, because we budget to have all support staff posts filled. Generally, if someone's on a month's notice, by the time they've handed in the notice, you've done the recruitment, you're always going to have a gap. So it's quite often that gap in between getting people leaving the business and then joining the business drives a lot of that underspend. Plus, we do have some posts that are kind of a bit more challenging to recruit to. You know, perhaps have to go out 2 or 3 times. So you may have a post that's vacant for 6 months. So that can just get a handful of those can drive up that underspend really quite quickly. And Councillor Sherwell's point around what else can we do with it short term is a really good point. Councillor actually say actually it's about delivery. What can we deliver? We've got coming to next week's Borough Authority our annual plan, which is really quite ambitious in terms of what we want to deliver as a service. We'll bring back an updated position in March where any residual underspend we'll bring a proposal in terms of this is what we could do to help us deliver against that annual plan in terms of kind of focusing on kind of short-term, fixed-term resource. So not locking it into the base when we're kind of uncertainty around long-term affordability, but what can we bring in to help us deliver our plan during that year to make the service better and to deliver those improvements we want to see.
Thank you. Okay, the recommendation is that the provisional outturn forecast for the authority as of 31st of December 25 be noted. We content?
Yeah.
Thank you. Moving on to item 10, the member scheme of allowances. I think in the absence of Graham, Katie has a short statement to make on his behalf.
Okay, the report in front of members is the members' scheme of allowances for 2026-27. The recommendation is for this committee to recommend to the authority that it adopts a scheme of allowances for 26-27 based on an uplift of 3.2%. The recommendation is based on the indexation which has been in place since 2012, with the exception of 1 year, which was 21-22, and therefore aligned to the preceding year's annual pay award for employees on the NJC Grey Book terms and conditions. The draft scheme of allowances for 26-27 is attached at Appendix 1. with the 25-26 figures included for illustration of the 3.2% increase, in line with the NJC Employers Grey Book Pay Award. The authority in adopting its annual scheme of allowances has a wide discretion and need only have regard to the recommendations of the independent remuneration panels of both Milton Keynes City Council and Buckinghamshire Council. And an update is provided in the report in the footnote on page 112. Thank you.
Questions to that statement? Councillor Bird.
Just a very brief question. I think Councillor Stutbury in particular is very keen on members' allowances and expenses and what have you being transparent. And although I know both Bucks and Milton Keynes expenses are can be seen on their website, I couldn't find anywhere where members' expenses were published.
Yeah, they are on.
They are.
I
just
yeah,
find it.
I can
Okay,
send you
that's
the
fine.
link to them.
Councillor Stutbury.
Firstly, I propose we accept the proposal, but secondly, I think the question is, in Buckinghamshire Council, they don't, the members' allowances which are displayed, they don't display the appointments allowances in Buckinghamshire Council website like we're here. That isn't just portrayed on the Buckinghamshire Council website allowances. It just has what your appointments are, but you can find it out, as Katie said, from coming here. What my view about transparency is you should be able to see it linear. That's my view, and I've made them statements in other places, and I still support that view because we judged by what we do, and I think it's a good thing. I think that's Buckinghamshire Council do one thing. I think Milton Keynes does something completely different on transparency. The two authorities have had different journeys, haven't they? And different control. So I think that's where we are with that. To explain that, I can go into more depth with it. It is very public. But I propose that we accept these.
The recommendation is that the authority is recommended to adopt the scheme of members' allowances for 26-27 as shown in Appendix 1. Those in favour? Thank you. That's approved. Moving on to item 11. This is Booker.
Morning. Morning. So I won't do the big full intro of how the pack is about stuff. I think everyone in the room is used to that now. And the only thing I will do is I'll give a few brief overview on a couple of the items within it, and then open up to the questions that have already been mentioned that are coming. As always, we've tried to provide details of a few highlighted measures. In this case, we've shone a light on the home fire safety visits completed, just to give a bit of light on the number dipping in December, but the overall good position. Likewise, with the fire safety audits, and then a much more in-depth look at over the border mobilisations into BFRS. Grounds. We understand this is something that's raised in most meetings that we come along. So it was just trying to give you a little bit more information to understand the utilisation of some of those appliances and when they do come, and that's in there for you. The only other thing I would nod to throughout the pack that's slightly changed is we've, as requested at the last authority, we've provided a bit more in-depth analysis on our attendance times. There's now a breakdown of the how many we attended within each minute sector from that reporting period. I've also provided some examples of some of those slower times in there just to help you understand why they were slow. There is one, for those that are eagle-eyed, there is one that we didn't comment on that took 51 minutes to attend. I was just going to give a very quick description now of why that, how that came about, and just some of the challenges we have. And again, I would try and change some of our processes to negate these times. So that 51-minute attendance time was in relation to us being requested by the police to attend a deliberate, what they believed was going to be a deliberate arson attempt at a property. En route, we were then asked to go to a standby location, not to go direct to the incident. Unfortunately, at that point, when we arrived at the incident, the standby location we did book in to attendance, the crews only booked into attendance
after sitting at standby for a certain length of time and then made it to an incident. Something we've picked up on is there's a little bit of a theme of process should be that once we get to the initial address that we were sent to, as you'll see in some of the commentary, there's motorway locations where we were given the wrong addresses. And what we should do is book an attendance there, but then continue our search or with updated information. So that's something we are working on. We're working with our crews, and hopefully you'll see an improvement going forward. But I just wanted to point that out. That also comes across, we did the same for the average attendance times to accidental dwelling fires. They're the changes, I guess. Everything else is as usual. So rather than me talk about those, I'll open up to the room and answer any questions I have.
Thank you, Craig. Any questions? Councillor Hare.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, thanks for that, Craig. It was me that asked for the slow response times, and I think that's a really good bit of detail there, and it helps us to understand, you know, because you throw that into the percentages and it throws it off completely, doesn't it? So that's so if we can have that, you know, regularly, that'd be really useful. On page 153, I'm going to raise it again because I always raise this. The table second from the bottom, the Aylesbury figure is still too high. The first two, 91 for Beaconsfield, 153 for Gerrards Cross. We know we haven't got a fire station in South Bucks, so we know that we're going to get over the border coming in. But actually, Aylesbury and then below that, Hadnam as well, which is kind of Aylesbury's ground, really. You know, 48, sorry, 48 times Aylesbury and Hadnam. It's far too high. It's far too high. And it just says to me that, once again, Aylesbury is under-resourced for its location, its strategic location. And, you know, going back to putting more whole-time firefighters in, I noticed we've got 3 fire engines lined up in a row. 1 and 2 go out. Number 3 is we rely on retained, Simon, don't we, to operate number 3. If number 3 were available more, then perhaps we wouldn't see this figure of 34 in Aylesbury, because that 34 is, as those of you that have been to the control room and heard someone phone 999 for a second time, you know, my kitchen's on fire, where are you? We're around the corner, sir. They were tracking it live. You know, those 34 times is 34 times someone that's waiting potentially. So I just want to highlight that again. We've got to focus on Aylesbury, because it's not a backwater in the middle of nowhere. It's our county town. It's got a huge population area. The growth here has been phenomenal. Something like more than 20,000 houses actually built. And when you go to certain parts of Aylesbury, there's another new estate gone up. You think that wasn't here last time I came. So Aylesbury focus, please.
Doug or Simon, you want to?
Yeah, no, thanks for the comments, and we will obviously keep looking at that, Councillor Hall. I think, as we've said before, there is an element of Aylesbury Station ground which tips up right over into Hertfordshire, and an element of those incidents will be that kind of Ivinghoe area. That is Aylesbury Station ground, and it's, you know, it can be serviced by the over the border services more quickly than the Aylesbury appliances. But I agree that with the geographical location of Aylesbury, there is a vulnerability when both pumps go out there. It's a bit of a trundle for the Amersham appliance to come down, or something from Milton Keynes, if there isn't the retained backup that's available. So yeah, those points are noted.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to my comment earlier that the stations we've got in this side of the county, the western side of the county, apart from Buckingham and Aylesbury, they're all retained. And as we know, the retained stations don't go out very much. So you can't rely on Princes Risborough and Hadnam, which are the 2 nearest stations, to get here, because they're not available. So we really do need to look at how we resource those retained stations.
Councillor Priestley.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is what page 143 around the fire safety audits. I had several questions, but I think the 2 that were most pertinent to me in understanding how we set the RAG thresholds. So do we have a defined minimum threshold below which red is is red performance is expected or accepted? And I appreciate that that might not be able to be answered here. But I would like to understand that.
I think Craig.
Okay.
Yes, I'll come back to that. So there's a bit of professional judgment in there, along with statistics and and also how much we think we should be able to achieve with the resource we have. So the numbers here were based on if we had full resource, the whole team, just how many we think we should get to with a bit of tolerance. So 66 was the number we believed we should be able to achieve. The RAG status, where it's more about, are we where we expect to be, or is it off, or is it extremely off? And then we need to do some more investigations as to why. That is also, just for reassurance, we're going to be reviewing that in the next coming weeks, whether those numbers are reflective of what we need, and also not just the resource we have, but against the risk as well. So that's something we're looking at, how much, not just how much work we can achieve, but is it enough to service that risk? So the numbers, in short, are a professional judgment against the resource we have, but we will review that inclusion of risk as well going forward.
Can I just add though, I mean, all of what Craig just said is correct, but essentially we need to be able to resource our risk-based inspection programme, which is a combination of yearly inspections for very high risk and 3 yearly inspections for the ones that are deemed high risk. And we need to allow a little bit of headroom for demand work, so post-fire incidents where we'll go and inspect and complaints. Now, we have tried over the last couple of years to really kind of challenge ourselves around, around what we do and don't visit, making sure we're hitting the highest risk. So that number is driven by being able to accommodate risk-based inspection, but it is also about what is reasonable to resource. So, and the other point Craig made, we are currently reviewing risk-based inspection programme. That will give us a number for the coming year, and we'll adjust the measure accordingly.
Okay, so that is okay. Thank you, Chair. So that leads to my second question about the fact that we had, was it 3 out of 9 inspectors missing or gone off or whatever? How does the dashboard take into account the volatility of the workforce in terms of how you make your professional judgments? And I'm not being funny by saying
no, that's fine.
That's the way we
calculate. This doesn't. It's more that's where the commentary comes in, I guess, and that becomes powerful. That allows us to explain where why we're not where we would expect to be, or why we're over where we would expect to be. That, for me, as looking at performance, that's just as bad as being under. If we're overachieving, or we're putting too much resource into it. So that's where the commentary comes in.
I see. So your storyboard gives the context for that.
But there are a few challenges, because what we typically find with protection is if you do get vacancies, occur through whatever reason, it's really difficult to find replacements. So you can go out to advert for a fire safety inspecting officer, and it's highly likely that you will not receive applicants from qualified inspecting officers, because the market is so challenging around it. So that obviously causes us a bit of concern, and some of our staff are in development roles that require them to go through those process of qualifications. And again, as per the December example, that pulls them out of service for a couple of weeks. So we have, since the last inspection programme, we have tried to make our model more resilient in terms of having kind of pathway from apprentices up to inspecting officers. So we've kind of got an internal talent pipeline, if you like. Use some grant funding to support that. We know we've got more work to do around that to make us more resilient. We know we are in next year's annual plan. We've identified how we might use associates, both internal and external, to support kind of peak demand periods. We're looking at where there are currently roles that are maybe only available to operational staff, can they be available to non-uniformed staff, and vice versa. So there's a lot of work going on to try and smooth out some of those challenges so that we are hitting that 66 consistently.
Okay.
The one thing I'll just come on the back of that as well is, while you get to see the report quarterly, what we now, the service does is we do it monthly, as part of our new governance arrangement. So we can react a bit quicker than we would be able to investigate. So it's questions.
Thank you, Greg. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you for Gary's contribution. I think we have to look at taking the availability question, which has been an ongoing one, then you look on page 154, and it shows you where we've gone out. I believe that's what it says. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is where we've gone out to other areas to do other people's work. Some of those figures were not available. Really need to understand, Gary. I think were they not available because another one came into our area? We've gone into other areas to actually work with other areas. You can see they're quite high stats there. In Buckingham, particularly going out of area, and that's because of its proximity to Northampton, Oxfordshire, where some of it's to Chiltern, Hertfordshire, that way. So we're uniquely placed in this county because of the shape of the county. We have more of these crossovers than perhaps other parts do. So we should see all of it in a linear line. I think the county was formed probably about the time of Agincourt. I think when we left Buckingham and went to Tilbury Docks, I think that's where the county got formed, they say. But off to Agincourt. But apart from that, I think the county is the shape it is. And that's half the issues.
Indeed. Councillor Rouse, and then I think Councillor Hall.
Yeah, apologies as well, because I've got a 12 o'clock other public duty, so rush hour, it's not because I don't like the answer, so. Mark kindly pointed out that we are already funding over headcount on whole time, and on page 156, you can see that actually over the course of the last financial year, our average full-time headcount has been 310. So the good news for Council Stutchbury is we've already saved 600k of the 1.8 million. On top of that, one of the trends that's really just starting to cause me concern, and I kind of just want to link for us, whole time availability seems to me to be on a downward trend. And that should be causing us concern because it also then sits across quite a material downward trend on call. And what's rising alongside it is bounce shift. And also, I would just say over the border mobilisation, it looks to me on some of the calculations, although I recognise they might not be the right denominators, but it looks like in some instances over the border is contributing to 28% of our incidents. I can't quite be sure that the denominator is right because you talk about mobilisations. I don't know if that's appliances, but that stat still looks too high to me. So I suppose a couple of questions. How much do we spend per annum, are we spending currently on per annum on bank shift? Because that again, if we increase whole time establishment, would enable us to slightly offset. You reference also in the report the operational lead guidance changes. How has that landed with colleagues in the service? Because I know there was some concerns that were being raised about it. We could just understand how that is. And then just sort of, I guess, final question is, when do we start to get concerned about whole time availability and the trend of it? And what are the actions that you think will drive it back up?
Can I go the first pass at some of those? So, which order? So I'm not concerned about the whole time availability. The CRMP, as agreed by the authority, was 12 immediately available whole time appliances. And also important to note, average response standard of 10 minutes. We are pretty consistently turning out those 12 appliances. I do note there are occasions where we've dropped to 11. That is a significant improvement on where the service was a few years ago when it was a daily average of 7 appliances. I think that's worth noting. And we are consistently exceeding our response standard. And if you look at the response standard to accidental dwelling fires, it gives me an assurance that our pumps are predominantly in the right place for the demand that we face. Some of the challenges we did have in Q3 was a particularly high level of sickness, so that did bring that 12 down on a few occasions, and obviously it did have an incremental impact to the use of bank. I think that's all correct to me, but I think we're expecting our bank cost to be about 800,000 by the end of the year. And we can certainly bring back scenarios and recommendations to the authority about what is the right whole time number. I think we all accept that it is lean to make that 12 work, but the calculation is do you add more whole-time firefighters into the mix, versus do you understand that using overtime is actually an effective way of managing and getting you 12 consistently? So that's the I suppose the discussion we can bring back to authority about what's the most appropriate way. We do still have some flexibility around the leave guidance. So going back to that traditional position where the service had a really low whole-time establishment, it was such a position that the whole-time staff weren't actually able to fit all of their leave into the year. So the service introduced something a few years ago called Exchange Bank, where people could take additional leave and somebody else would get paid to fill their fire engine. That has run on even now that we're into the 300, and what we found through our internal governance over the last year is that that's cost us a significant chunk of bank usage. And it just seemed crazy that we're now in a position where people can take their leave, but we're applying such a level of flexibility that they could have a day off if crew didn't permit. So that's what we've adjusted in this year's leave guidance. In terms of how it's landed, a lot of our staff have known no different, and therefore it has caused a few challenges for us with staff, and with Deputy Chief Officer kind of wrote an open letter to staff explaining the situation and why we were needing to do it. We're already seeing that bank position improve from an exchange bank, and we have more opportunity with the next iteration of leave policy to completely eradicate it, because we've done it in a kind of phased approach to try and be fair and appropriate to staff. So I appreciate I've probably gone around the houses a little bit, but in terms of our level of concern, I think, go back to my point, I think we are lean. I think our model is working in terms of the indicators of response standard, the indicators of close to 100% whole time 12 pump availability. And just to wrap up in terms of the over the board, I understand, and I think the point Councillor Hall made is a good one, that there are probably some pinch points where we might want to look at, can we resource slightly differently, or set up our arrangements with Thames Valley Fire Control slightly differently. But I think you've got to weigh up, is our own resourcing model being propped up first by other services, or actually do we have a really strong resourcing model that is supplemented by mutual aid from surrounding areas as we do elsewhere? And I think, when you think about value for money for the taxpayer, when you think about actually the quickest response for the communities of Buckinghamshire are being serviced by borderless mobilising, I don't think that necessarily presents a bad picture myself. I think we can stand by that. It'd be very interesting to see where HMI are at when they come in, but actually it's arguably a cost-effective model to support our own response.
So can I just clarify that? So am I misreading RSP 302, which is showing 6 months trend where we haven't hit whole time availability? Am I misreading that? And secondly, are you saying that we shouldn't be concerned that we're not hitting whole time availability? If that's the case, I just want to make sure I really understand what metrics telling me before I misunderstood it.
So we aren't hitting the target we set. So we set a high target. There will always be 100% will always be very challenging, because there will be periods where we lose a pump for, I don't know, could be a pump goes off the run due to some of them will account for shifts where we haven't been able to turn out the 12 and we haven't been able to fill with bank. That is a small percentage, and occasionally we drop to 11. December particularly was Q3 was challenging for us. So yes, we haven't achieved the 12 consistently. The CRMP suggests that essentially we need 9 pumps as a base minimum, but 12 is what we're seeking to achieve for a level of resilience to meet our response standards.
I'll just reassure you as well very quickly, because we're in the fortunate position where February, I can tell you January we had 99%, over 99% availability, only 7 bank shifts. On call was 18.1% availability, which was supported by, in some way, some whole time staff. So it's another challenge is balancing that throughout the year rather than peaks and troughs.
One of the things we really need to try and smooth out is that there's a little bit more work to do around leave, because as Craig says, and it's difficult because we've got to be fair to our staff, and clearly a lot of our staff want to take the peak holiday periods, Christmas, summer holidays, etc. But you do see, in terms of people available on duty in January, as you say, we're way over what we need for the 12 pumps, but of course that has an effect elsewhere. So we are trying to be more efficient around the leave policy for next year, but balancing that against what the FBU would see as reasonable for their staff and indeed their members and our staff.
Thank you for your contribution. Councillor Bay.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that graph on page 147 because it, helps demonstrate the deviation from the mean, and the means do a lot of heavy lifting, I think, in some documents. In the on-call consultation evidence pack, we had some information around the stations where typically the attendance time was longer, and there was a geographical map showing where attendance times were typically longer. And I have already emailed Louise about this. I think where we've got, because there is around a third of calls that are going over the 10 minutes, it would be really useful to understand the location of those incidents.
Yep.
On maybe on a quarterly level and then on a cumulative level to see if there are any particular hotspots to inform the service going forward.
So I did see your email. The plan was to have lovely, beautiful A3 printed maps today. Due to if anyone walked past me upstairs, you just see how frustrated I was with the
okay.
Unfortunately not. I can spend some time with you straight afterwards and show you the maps on a smaller scale. The CRMP does, in the CRMP, it shows those maps of where we're predicting where we get to. We also do an annual response standards report, which unfortunately doesn't come through this group. But I can show you the maps in there, and it shows you on average and single points as well. So if we want, we can catch up after this, and anyone else that wants to see them, I'm happy to share.
Thank you. And then I had a second point about staff absence. As you might expect with whole-time staff and also support staff, you've got more of an absence when you have seasonal flus, over the winter and stuff like that. But this was completely, the pattern was completely reversed with the on-call absence, which was predominantly over the summer months. Had anybody got any comments or speculation on why that might be?
I can't comment on the summer months, but what I can comment on is sickness absence was high for November, December. And what we've done, we've put a number of interventions in place to, one, look at patterns that are emerging, more control by line managers, making sure they're monitoring sickness absence, having those early conversations. But what I can say, if Craig corrects me on this if I'm wrong, but I know for January, sickness absence has significantly dropped for January, so we are seeing the right movements in the right direction.
Yeah.
So it is a case moving forward of definitely monitoring it more closely, making sure that line managers are having those conversations, return to work discussions, looking at any early patterns that are starting to emerge. And from a HR perspective, making sure we're monitoring that through our people delivery group. So positive signs for January, but we'll definitely keep on top of that moving forward.
I think that's fine. I just think there needs to be a little bit of thought around the high absence in summer months.
Yeah, I would just add two parts to that as well. One part is one of the downfalls of that measure is we take the average of the national picture and how much absence they have per member of staff, but we weren't privy at the time to the seasonal trends on that. So unfortunately, it looks like our measure just does balanced across the whole year, which isn't ideal because we know in the winter months there's more cold and flu. And the one thing I would say about on-call absence is generally when we've looked in the past, it's normally long-term due to musculoskeletal and things like that. So it's harder to influence, but yeah, we'll definitely take that away and look at it.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions on that? Yeah, Councillor Hall.
I was just going to go back to Robin and Scotland, Chairman. Regarding Aylesbury, when I said, it wasn't good enough having over the border, and you said we've got to allow for going out. On page 154, it shows quite clearly Aylesbury fire engines only went out 4 times in the quarter. So, I think the argument is still very strong that we need to look more. What I'd like to see is some data next time, possibly Craig, on Aylesbury 3, how often that goes out. Because if it's sitting in the fire station and we've got other appliances coming in, then we need to do something about that in our county town in a key station like this. What I was impressed, Simon, I understand in Prince's Risborough last month there was a house fire, and what we've done as a service, we've put 2 whole time into Prince's Risborough because there were 2 retained on call available, and between them they managed to crew and went to the incident. And I think that if we can utilise excess spare whole time staff in our key retain stations so that we can support Aylesbury and whatnot. I think that's a really good use of crewing. I mean, do we do that very often?
So we tend to do it when we are when we're overstaffed like now, so when there's not much leave being taken. So it kind of plays into the previous conversation about bank utilisation and changes to the policy, which we'll come back to in a moment. It isn't the most popular use of our staff, if I'm honest. The trade unions are not keen on it. They would rather see us use those additional staff to crew appliances to 5 or to crew specialist appliances in a different way, which we acknowledge and accept.
Yeah.
So for us, it's just getting the balance right. So what we've started to do is where we can really make an impact, and we've got the staff to do it, we will make that impact. But we're cognizant of the fact that there's a push and a pull on that one. If I can just cover the bit of just the question previously about the changes in our bank procedure and the changes in our leave procedure. The honesty is that didn't land very well across the service with our staff either. Which is why, we did write an open letter to staff to explain our position that we were spending too much money on Exchange Bank, which was a hangover from the previous, where we didn't put staff at all, for people to take leave. So we need to make those changes because we want to make efficiencies. We want to make those bank savings so that we can reinvest that back into the service. Our crews understand that, but it does change the way they can take leave. So what we have done is we've got that policy back on the table now. It's open for consultation, and we're running staff focus groups so that people can get their say and we can get a really fair and transparent, honest leave allocation procedure for our staff that they understand and we're all comfortable with. I just want to cover that as well.
Great, what's coming?
Yeah, I was just going to come back to as well the Aylesbury third clients. I know you were questioning how many times they went out. For me, and where the on-call improvement program came in, is in their modules. Had they been fully available, how many times they go? I think that's more important because it would show that would then still show you how many times we'd utilise over the border. Should you have 3, 4, 5 months in Aylesbury? That's the bit I would be more interested in. So we're happy to do either or, just making sure we're clear of what you would rather see, whether it's how many times they mobilised or the impact of over the border should they be available.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, that is it 34 times? I can't remember.
Yeah.
In theory, if that third pump was there, that 34 times might well come down to 1 or 2 times because that third pump would go out and respond anywhere on the patch. So it would, I'd be interested to see if it were available, those over the border into Aylesbury, would they be necessary or not?
It does depend on, obviously, it depends on the turn-in time of the on-call pump versus wherever the over the border's coming from. But one of the things we are seeking to do, irrespective of, I suppose, the consultation outcome, is we know we've got areas we've got to strengthen around the on-call. And there are stations that we absolutely see the benefit in trying to work really hard to improve things like you talked about. And then you were referencing sort of use of hold time in that example, but actually, where we haven't got 2 pumps, can we bring those people together effectively to make it a 1 pump that's working? So there is a lot of opportunity for improvement that may, in some instances, bring down some of that over the border where maybe it's less desirable. I think some over the border is probably not a problem, but there are some I can understand that are more concerning in terms of travel distance and locations.
Yeah, Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Chair. I'm delighted to see on page 102 tables for energy usage, which have been a long time coming. Just interested to know why from the gas has gone up significantly. I don't know if it's been that cold a month. Was there any particular reason why it's went up by a third from November?
I can answer it. Do you want to?
You know the answer.
I believe I know the answer, and it was more to do, and this still requires a little bit of work as well. We did utilise a bit more gas. It was also about there were certain gas meters that only came on during that period, so the number increased, which wasn't allowed for within that metric, and due to the timings. So I think one things we do need to go away is go and look at our seasonal trends. We don't have that data at the moment. This is just our rolling data, and it was the fact that the last of the few gas meters that we could then do locally and put into this data. So I believe that's the answer. I will confirm, we'll go away, find out for sure, and we'll come back to you. It's probably the safest answer.
Okay, thank you for that. Thanks for the honesty. Would be useful in the commentary when we've got the question. But will we be using things like this to help negotiate contracts with our suppliers when we get a better view of our usage, so that we can go back to them and say when we can peak and that's when we can go low, etc.
Yes, so we have a broker which negotiates energy prices on our behalf. They already have all that information. The real use of this data now we've got the smart meters up and running is for us to be able to look at real granular trends day to day and look at like kind of spikes and say, okay, why is that station much higher than that station? That station is normally really low, why they had a spike there? So to be able to drill into and take that kind of real remedial action on a day to day basis.
Will you start considering putting some batteries in some station when you get that information to reduce further our requirement?
Yes, so we keep that under review, especially when we do like a big development like Wickham proposal bring forward. We're always going to look at improving the energy efficiency of our buildings. We're bringing a new sustainability framework, which will go through the overall audit committee next month in terms of setting out our aspirations around kind of improving that environmental impact. So yeah, we'll consider all of those options.
Yeah, big step forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchford.
Yeah, going back to Gareth's point, I mean, it makes a strong point for why the consultation is necessary and why the outcomes of the consultation findings should be fluid around health and safety and around doing it. I think that the point made, and if I heard it wrong, I apologise, about when he asked what I thought was a reasonable question about where you move staff about and filling it, that then the union has said, no, we're not very favourable of that. And they didn't really like that when them covering things we're going to do. That's really challenging, because what you're trying to do is deliver the best service on the day. And really they should be more understanding of that point of view, because we can't have a service run by denial. You've got to work together to try and do it. So I think the arguments Gary makes are good arguments, and I think we need to do the analysis on that once the consultation analysis is done, work through it and see against what we have discussed today, whether that's we can fill that. Because what is the problem is the reason the consultation is being done is the historical problem of on-call. And I'm not going to go around saying nobody tried to do anything. That's just childish. Everyone's tried to do anything, but now we've reached a point of time where maybe we can start to address this. But if when we get to address it, we're stuck with a situation where, well, some of those things can be done by moving this person to that person, and then we're being told, no, we don't want to do that. We want to do it that way. We're then in denial again. So I think there needs to be a real conversation about what the purpose is about this, and maybe we need to take them in a room and explain to them it's about health and safety and getting stuff done. Because I'm shocked when I heard that there was pushback on doing what I thought sounded like a really sensible decision, and we shouldn't be minded to support that. We should challenge that, because we're here just to represent, regardless of politics, the interests of the residents. And I found that point quite difficult to hear.
Simon.
Yeah, I suppose just to clarify, because I don't represent the FBU and I can't speak for them, but I think the push and the pull there is like, well, it's noted in their improvement agenda that they would like to see more whole-time firefighters on more whole-time fire engines. So they want crews of 5, whereas traditionally our crewing model, well, not traditionally, but we are running at more or less at 4 most of the time. So their primary concern is more around the crewing with 5, and that's where the kind of push and the pull is about using staff for on-call appliances or crewing up that 5.
I think, Simon, coming back to that point, the conversation we've had about which you're working on, I know, to make sure that their FBU manifesto term can be clarity into the sense, because I'm clear that we collaboratively want to set this is ticked off, that's done, we've met that. Some of these things that you're working on, when it comes to the authority and we're able to discuss it, will show where the pinch points are in actually having a slim and efficient service in all aspects. So I think that will be really useful because they want this done and we all want to get that met. And this appointment of where people go, if that's part of the decision on 4 here is what we've decided on, we couldn't change that because going back to the original point that we'd have to raise millions and millions of pounds to fund the extra one on every engine, then we'd fail to deliver all the other targets that we've got. So I think there's a real question here that you're saying to me that oh no, we've got this here. And I've read it and I'm worried. So I think that once your work about you're working on this paper, which is going to come forward, which we're waiting for the FBU to sign off on, which is about their own manifesto. We may get that may play into this analysis and work with what Gary's on about, which is reasonable suggestion to try and get something work forward. But I am really worried if we're being told no when we're just trying to do the right thing.
I think Doug would like to.
Yeah, just to expand on that point, I suppose. So as Simon said, one of the things nationally, the FBU have never accepted a drop from 5 on a fire appliance to 4, and nearly every service in the country now for a number of years have written for. You know, you can apply safe systems of work. Probably for the officers in the room, if you said if money weren't an object, would you rather see 5? We'd probably say yes, we would. But that's, you know, that is the national position. What we're finding with this particular piece of work, the on-call improvement programme, is some of the sort of very strong national FBU positions are playing out locally. But I think we can assure you that once we get over the other side of whatever the consultation decision is, locally we do have a good relationship and we will be able to work with those FBU members to whatever that improvement journey looks like. You know, that's one example about, all right, you know, how do we use some of our whole time support when it's appropriate to do so to get an on-call fire engine on the run. But there are loads of things that we will be sat around the table with them trying to construct an improvement plan together. So just and they will be keen to come to the table, I would suggest.
Thank you for the explanation.
Are we all done on questions there? Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that. The item is the need to. And we go back to the recommendation that the report be approved for submission to the fire authority. All in favour? Agree? Please note that the next meeting will be on Wednesday, the 18th of March at 10 AM. Thank you all for attending today and your valuable contributions. Interesting. Thank you.